My name is Sophia, and this is the beginning of my story. I used to live in a small rented room in a quiet part of Europe, in a city that always felt cold and a little lonely. The building was old, the walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbors arguing almost every night. Still, I stayed there for years because it was cheap, and every dollar I saved meant I was one step closer to something better. I worked long hours at a simple office job, sometimes staying late just to earn a little extra. My life was not exciting, but I had a clear goal in my mind. One day, I would have a place of my own. Not everyone believed in me. My older sister, Ava, was the first to laugh at my plans. She would sit across from me during family dinners and say things like, "You really think you can buy a place? In this economy? You can barely save $100. Her words used to hurt, but after a while, I stopped reacting. I learned to stay quiet and let my actions speak instead. My dad was not much different. He didn't laugh, but he didn't support me either. He would just nod and say, "We'll see," like he already knew I would fail. But I didn't fail. After years of saving, counting every dollar, and saying no to things I wanted, I finally had enough. I found a small apartment in another part of the city. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it looked terrible at first. The paint was peeling off the walls, the kitchen cabinets were broken, and the floor made a creaking sound every time I walked across it. But when I stood inside it for the first time, I didn't see the damage. I saw possibility. I saw my future. I spent around $12,000 renovating that apartment. Every weekend, I worked on it myself. I painted the walls white, slowly and carefully, even when my arms hurt. I replaced the old cabinets with simple new ones that cost me $800. I saved up to buy a soft blue couch for $500, and I remember how proud I felt when it was finally placed in the living room. It wasn't just furniture, it was proof that I was building something real. There were nights when I sat alone on the floor, eating cheap food and looking around at half-finished walls. I was tired, stressed, and sometimes unsure. But even in those moments, I felt stronger than I ever had before. This apartment was mine. No one gave it to me. No one helped me pay for it. Every corner of it held my effort, my time, and my belief in myself. When it was finally done, I stood in the middle of the living room and took a deep breath. The space felt warm, clean, and peaceful. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I felt like I belonged somewhere. This was not just an apartment, it was my home, built with my own hands and my own money, and nothing in the world felt more important than that. The locked door 1 month after I finished renovating my apartment, life had finally started to feel normal. I had settled into a routine that felt calm and steady. Every morning, I would wake up early, make a simple breakfast, and sit for a few minutes on my blue couch before leaving for work. In the evenings, I would come back, tired but satisfied, knowing I was returning to a place that truly belonged to me. It wasn't a big life, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. That day started like any other. Work was long and a little stressful, but nothing unusual. I remember checking my phone a few times, thinking about going home, cooking something warm, and maybe watching something before going to bed. I even stopped by a small store on my way back and spent about $30 on groceries, bread, eggs, and a few things I liked. It felt like a normal evening, quiet and simple. But everything changed the moment I reached my apartment door. I stood there, balancing the grocery bag in one hand, and reached into my pocket with the other. I pulled out my key and slid it into the lock. It didn't go in properly. I frowned, thinking I was just tired. Maybe I wasn't holding it right. I tried again, slower this time. The key still didn't fit. A strange feeling started to grow in my chest. I looked closely at the lock. It looked different, new. My heart began to beat faster. I tried again, pushing the key in harder, turning it slightly, hoping it would work. It didn't. The door stayed closed, silent, like it didn't recognize me anymore. I knocked. At first, there was no response. I knocked again, louder this time. I could feel my hands starting to shake, but I didn't understand why yet. Nothing made sense. Then I heard footsteps. The door opened slowly. A woman stood in front of me. I had never seen her before in my life. She looked calm, almost confused, as if I was the one who didn't belong there. "Can I help you?" she asked. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, trying to understand what I was seeing. "This is my apartment," I finally said, my voice quiet but firm. She frowned slightly. "No," she replied. "I live here." It felt like the ground disappeared under my feet. I took a small step back, my mind racing, trying to find some kind of explanation. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe I was at the wrong door. But I knew I wasn't. I knew every mark on that wall, every small detail around the door. This was my home. I think there's some confusion, I said, trying to stay calm. I own this place. She shook her head again, more confidently this time. I was told I could stay here. Those words made everything worse. I stepped away from the door, my hands cold now, my heart beating so loudly I could barely think. I pulled out my phone and called my dad. My fingers felt stiff as I held the phone to my ear. He answered after a few rings. Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's someone in my apartment. There was a short pause, but not the kind I expected. Not shock. Not concern. Oh, he said casually, that. I felt something inside me tighten. What do you mean, that? I asked. We let Emily move in, he said, like he was talking about something small, something normal. You're young. She's going through a divorce. She needed a place. For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. My apartment, I said slowly. You can figure something else out, he replied. Don't make it a big deal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stood there in silence, holding the phone, while everything I had worked for felt like it was slipping away. I paid for that place, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She needed it more, he answered. That was the moment something inside me broke, but not in the way he expected. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just hung up. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the door, at the woman who was now closing it slowly like I was a stranger. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt louder than anything I had ever heard. My groceries were still in my hand. My home was right in front of me. And yet, I had nowhere to go. The air felt colder now. The street looked different, like I didn't belong there anymore. People walked past me, not noticing anything unusual, while my whole world had just changed in a few minutes. I could have knocked again. I could have argued, shouted, demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around. Each step I took felt heavy at first, but slowly, something else began to take its place. Not sadness. Not fear. Something stronger. I realized, as I walked away from that door, that this was not just about a place to live. It was about respect. It was about everything I had worked for being taken from me like it meant nothing. And I knew, deep down, that I was not going to let that be the end of my story. Give me generator story of chapter 2, in 800 words, in complete paragraphs. Writing, variant equals standard ID equals 90731, chapter 2. The locked door. A month had passed since I finished renovating my apartment, and for the first time in my life, everything felt stable. My days were simple, but they carried a quiet kind of happiness. I had built a routine that made me feel grounded. Every morning, I would wake up in my own space, make a cup of coffee, and sit by the window for a few minutes before heading to work. There was something peaceful about knowing that no matter how long the day felt, I would return to a place that belonged only to me. That evening started like any other. Work had been tiring, but nothing unusual. I remember checking the time more than once, thinking about going home. I planned to cook something small, maybe sit on my blue couch and relax. On my way back, I stopped at a nearby shop and spent about $25 on groceries. It was nothing special, just basic things, but I remember feeling content carrying that bag in my hand. When I reached my building, I didn't notice anything strange. The hallway looked the same, quiet and slightly dim. I walked up to my door, already thinking about changing into something comfortable. I shifted the grocery bag to one hand and reached into my pocket for my key. That's when everything changed. I slid the key into the lock, but it didn't go in properly. I paused, frowning slightly. Maybe I was just tired. I tried again, slower this time, carefully guiding the key toward the lock. It still didn't fit. A small sense of confusion turned into unease. I looked closely at the door. The handle looked slightly different. The lock, it wasn't the same one I had installed. My heartbeat started to rise, slow at first, then faster. I tried again, pressing the key harder, twisting it slightly, hoping it would somehow work. It didn't. I knocked on the door. At first, there was no answer. I stood there, frozen, staring at the surface of the door that I had painted myself just weeks ago. I knocked again, louder this time, my hand trembling slightly. Then I heard movement inside. Footsteps. The sound made my chest tighten. The door opened slowly, and a woman stood there. I had never seen her before. She looked at me with a calm expression, almost like I was the one interrupting her evening. "Yes?" she asked. I stared at her, my mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. "This is my apartment," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. She shook her head gently. "No, I live here." The words didn't feel real. I took a step back, looking past her into the apartment. My apartment. I could see my blue couch in the corner, my walls, my space. But somehow, I was the one standing outside. "There must be a mistake," I said, trying to stay calm. "I own this place." She crossed her arms lightly. "I was told I could stay here." That sentence made something inside me sink. I didn't argue. I didn't know how to. Instead, I stepped back further and pulled out my phone. My hands felt cold as I dialed my dad's number. He answered after a few seconds. "Dad," I said, forcing myself to stay steady, "there's someone in my apartment." There was a pause, but it wasn't the kind I expected. It wasn't concern or surprise. "Oh, yes," he said casually. "I was going to tell you." My grip on the phone tightened. "Tell me what?" I asked. "We let Emily move in," he said. His tone was calm, like he was talking about something small. "She's going through a divorce. She needed a place to stay." I felt like I couldn't breathe for a moment. "My place?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. "You're young," he replied. "You can manage. She needs it more right now." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to process what he was saying. Every dollar I had saved, every hour I had worked, every moment I had spent building that home, it all felt invisible to him. "I paid for that apartment," I said quietly. "It's not permanent," he answered. "Don't make this into something big." That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, deeply. I opened my eyes and looked at the door again. The woman was still there, watching me like I didn't belong. Like I was just someone causing trouble. "I understand," I said into the phone, even though I didn't. Then I ended the call. I stood there for a few seconds, saying nothing. The woman slowly closed the door, and I heard the lock click. That sound echoed in my mind, sharper than anything else. My home was right there, and I was locked out of it. I looked down at the grocery bag in my hand. It suddenly felt heavy, like everything else I was carrying inside me. Around me, life continued as normal. People walked by, doors opened and closed, distant voices filled the hallway. But for me, everything had stopped. I could have knocked again. I could have demanded answers, raised my voice, tried to force my way back in. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around. My steps were slow at first, but steady. As I walked away, I felt something building inside me. Not anger, not sadness, but something stronger. Something clear. I realized then that this was not just about a door or a lock. It was about what was mine. And I knew, with complete certainty, that I was not going to let anyone take that away from me. I didn't know exactly where I was going when I turned away from my apartment, but I knew I couldn't stay there. The hallway suddenly felt like I had no right to even stand in it. Each step I took echoed softly, and with every step, the reality of what had just happened became clearer. I had been locked out of my own home, not by a stranger, but by my own family. When I stepped outside the building, the air felt colder than usual. It was evening now, and the sky had already started to darken. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. I stood there for a moment, holding my grocery bag, unsure of what to do next. My mind kept replaying my dad's voice. "You're young. You can manage." Those words didn't just hurt, they erased everything I had worked for. I started walking. At first, my steps were slow, almost uncertain, like I was waiting for someone to call me back, to fix everything, to say it was all a mistake. But no one came. No one called. No one stopped me. So I kept walking, moving further away from the place I had once called home. As I walked through the streets, I noticed small details I would normally ignore. The sound of cars passing by. The quiet conversations of people walking in pairs. The warm light coming from apartment windows, where others were living their lives, safe and undisturbed. It felt strange, like I was watching the world from the outside. I thought about Ava. I could almost hear her voice, clear and sharp in my mind. "You'll never make it on your own." For years, I had carried those words like a weight, trying to prove her wrong. And I had proven her wrong. I had built something real. But in one moment, it felt like she had been right all along, not because I failed, but because the people around me never believed I deserved to succeed. That thought could have broken me, but it didn't. Instead, it made something inside me stronger. I tightened my grip on the grocery bag and kept walking. My hands were cold now, but my mind felt clearer than it had in a long time. I began to realize that what had just happened wasn't just unfair, it was wrong. Completely wrong. I had paid for that apartment. Every dollar, every bill, every small expense had come from me. No one had helped me. No one had the right to take it from me. I stopped walking for a moment and looked around. I was standing at a quiet corner, not far from the main road. Cars moved past quickly, their lights flashing by. For a second, I felt tired. Not just physically, but deeply tired in a way that came from everything I had been holding inside for years. I could go back, I thought. I could knock on the door again. I could argue, explain, maybe even beg them to understand. But the moment that thought came, I pushed it away. No. I wasn't going to beg for something that already belonged to me. That realization changed everything. I took a deep breath and started walking again, this time with more purpose. My steps were no longer uncertain. I knew exactly what I needed to do, even if it felt difficult. Even if it meant standing alone. After a few minutes, I saw the building I was looking for, a police station. The bright lights above the entrance stood out against the darkening sky. I slowed down slightly as I approached, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt nervous. I had never done anything like this before. But another part of me felt steady, grounded in the truth of my situation. I walked inside. The station was quiet, with only a few people sitting around. An officer stood behind the desk, looking down at some papers. When he noticed me, he looked up and gave a small nod. "Can I help you?" he asked. I stepped forward, placing my grocery bag gently on the floor beside me. For a moment, I didn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it clearly. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my documents, the lease, the payment records, everything I had carefully kept. My hands were steady now as I placed them on the desk in front of him. "I need help," I said. He looked at the papers, then back at me. "What's going on?" I met his eyes and answered, calm and firm. "Someone is living in my apartment," I said. "And I want my home back." Saying those words out loud felt different. It made everything real, but it also made me feel stronger. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking action. The officer picked up the documents and began to read them carefully. The room was quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like something was finally moving in the right direction. As I stood there, waiting, I realized something important. I had walked away from my apartment that night not because I was weak, but because I was choosing a better way to fight for what was mine. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. Taking it back the next morning felt different from any other morning I had ever lived. I hadn't slept much the night before. My mind kept replaying everything. The locked door, the stranger inside my home, my dad's calm voice as if nothing was wrong. But even with all that, I didn't feel weak. I felt focused. Something inside me had settled. I knew what I was doing, and I knew why I was doing it. I stood outside my apartment building again, but this time, I wasn't alone. 2 police officers stood beside me. One of them held a copy of my documents, the same ones I had shown at the station. The other looked at the door, calm and serious. The hallway felt smaller than before, quieter, almost like it was waiting for something to happen. My heart was beating fast, but not from fear. It was something else, something stronger, something steady. "This is the one of the officers asked. "Yes," I said. He stepped forward and knocked firmly on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard movement inside again. Footsteps. The same sound as the night before, but this time, it didn't make me feel small. The door opened, and Emily stood there. Her expression changed the moment she saw the officers. The calm confidence she had before was gone. She looked confused, maybe even nervous. "Yes?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. The officer spoke clearly and calmly. "We're here regarding this property. This apartment belongs to Sophia," he said, gesturing toward me. "We've reviewed the documents. You are not authorized to stay here." Emily looked at me, then back at the officer. "But, her dad told me I could stay," she said. The officer nodded slightly. "That doesn't change ownership. This property is legally hers. There was a short silence. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, looking past her into my apartment. My blue couch was still there. My walls were still the same. But everything felt like it had been disturbed, like someone had stepped into a space they were never meant to touch. I don't have anywhere else to go, Emily said, her voice shaking slightly. For a moment, I felt something soft inside me, something that wanted to understand, to feel sorry for her situation. But then I remembered everything. The months of work. The money I had saved. The night I stood outside my own door, treated like I didn't belong. This wasn't about her situation. This was about my life. The officer spoke again, gently but firmly. You'll need to gather your belongings and leave. Emily hesitated, then slowly stepped back. She didn't argue again. Maybe she understood. Maybe she realized there was nothing more she could say. I watched as she moved through the apartment, picking up her things. Every second felt long, but I stayed still. I wasn't there to fight or to shout. I was there to take back what was mine. After some time, she walked toward the door with her bags. She paused for a moment, looking at me like she wanted to say something. But in the end, she said nothing. She just walked past me and left. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway. And just like that, it was over. I stepped inside slowly. The air felt familiar, but also different. I walked into the living room and looked around. Everything was still there, but it didn't feel the same as before. Not yet. It felt like the space had been shaken, like it needed time to become mine again. Still, I was home. I placed my bag down and sat on my blue couch. For a moment, I just sat there in silence, letting everything settle. My hands rested on my lap, calm and steady. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't confused. I felt clear. A little later, my phone rang. It was my dad. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering. You didn't have to go that far, he said, his tone slightly annoyed. We could have handled it differently. I took a slow breath before replying. No, I said quietly. This was the only way. There was a pause on the other end. She needed help, he said. And I needed respect, I answered. He didn't reply after that. We ended the call shortly after. Not long later, I received a message from Ava. Didn't expect that from you, she wrote. I stared at the message for a moment, then locked my phone without replying. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. That evening, I sat in my apartment again, the same place I had worked so hard to build. The walls were still white. The couch was still soft. The space was still mine. But I was not the same person who had stood here a month ago. Back then, I thought building a home was about money, effort, and time. Now I understood something deeper. A home is not just something you create. It's something you protect. And sometimes, protecting it means standing alone, making difficult choices, and refusing to let anyone take what you've earned. I leaned back against the couch and looked around the room one more time. This was my home. I had built it with my own hands. And this time, I had taken it back with my own strength. No one was going to take it from me again.